Parliamentary Reporters Dictation number 46 at the speed of 160 words per minute. Last 5 seconds. Ready? Yes, start. We in India therefore have to evolve an alternative that overcomes the shortcomings of capitalism as well as communism. We have to admit that so far we have not succeeded in the effort. As in most other countries, in India too, labor is often treated as a marginal and disposable component. Not only are the material needs of workers insufficiently met, but also their needs at the workplace and their role as creative agents in the organization are generally ignored. As a result, a worker becomes a cog in the huge economic machine in the working of which he has little control or say. Is it not a fact that many of our brilliant workers never get a chance to effectively communicate their ideas to decision makers in the organization and participate in the implementation of better work practices? Is it not a fact that most of our organizations are highly hierarchical, displaying a kind of rigid caste structure in factories and offices? Is it not a fact that there are insufficient incentives for good work and also insufficient disincentives for careless work? By incentives, I do not only mean material incentives. Even moral incentives like the Shram Awards go a long way in inspiring and motivating workers. If we analyze the causes for many of India's economic problems, we find that the chief one has been our inability to harness the full creative potential of our working people. This is truth of both the public sector and the private sector. Both have their own pluses and minuses. Although it is the minuses of the public sector which often get highlighted more. The challenge before both the public sector and the private sector in India is how to vastly and quickly increase productivity through better utilization of our human potential. In the highly interlinked global economy that has today come into being, the only guarantor for survival and success is productivity. The message of globalization for each and every economic activity in India is stark: become more productive or perish. This warning is valid for many of our public sector undertaking. 2. India has committed vast amount of national resources in running the PSUs. However, the expectations and promises with which they were set up have been largely belied. The productivity, competitiveness, and return on investment of many PSUs give us no cause for satisfaction. Restructuring of PSUs has therefore become a national imperative. We just cannot afford to have national assets to underperform or worse still become a drain on scarce budgetary resources. My government is committed to PSUs reforms that will safeguard our national and workers' interests. Making Indian companies and India's national economy more productive is not going to be an easy or painless task. We must recognize here that capital is scarce and costly, and this is especially so in view of the current downturn in the national and global economy. Market conditions have become highly volatile, although we in India can say with some satisfaction that our economy has remained relatively immune to the crisis that has engulfed several countries in Southeast Asia and elsewhere. In this rapidly changing global scenario, better utilization of human resources and adoption of more efficient technologies and work practices become all the more important. This places major responsibilities on all of us, on policymakers in the government, management, trade unions, R&D institutions, media, and of course each and every worker. In this context, the first thought I would like to put before my countrymen is that productivity enhancement must be given the priority in all sectors of the economy. The appeal I would like to make to every worker and every organization is work faster, work better, work for the nation. Concretely, this would mean that individuals as well as organizations must pay greater attention to cutting costs and boosting the quality of their products and services. Both individuals and organizations must give priority to better management of available assets before drawing up plans for new investment. They must think of ways to save energy and materials in every economic activity. Studies have shown that with technologies and work practices, Indian industry can save up to 30% of the energy which it now consumes and 15 to 20% of the materials which it now uses. The greatest scope for saving, however, is in time, which is also the most precious of all the economic resources. If a certain work can be completed in half the time that it otherwise takes, it not only satisfies the consumer but to that extent also doubles the rate of growth of the organization. I believe that there is a vast scope for both speeding and improving the work in every office or productive establishment in the country, especially in the government. I have a specific proposal to translate this potential into reality, which I would like to place before the nation. Let every organization in the country invite ideas and suggestions from its employees at all levels on how it can work faster and better. I call upon policymakers in the government, captains of industry and trade unions, and leaders of other concerned organizations to develop this concept further so that we can launch the National Work Improvement Campaign in an expeditious and effective manner. The cornerstone of the National Work Improvement Campaign will have to be an emphasis on teamwork. Excellence in work is rarely the result of individual excellence. Rather, it is the cumulative outcome of the proper management of team talent. In order to enrich and activate team talent, we must create organizations that are less hierarchical and more democratic. We must create an environment which accepts creative ideas and initiatives from whichever direction they may come. The National Work Improvement Campaign must also place high emphasis on continuous learning at the workplace. Training, retraining, and acquisition of new knowledge should become an integral part of our work culture. Let each and every economic organization in the country become a learning organization, and let India itself become a learning nation. Our efforts to create a new national work culture will bear the desired fruit only if it is rooted in the age-old concept of seva. Work becomes more than a job indeed. Work becomes workshop only when it is done with the attitude of Samaj Seva and Rashtra Seva. Once again, I congratulate the Shram Award winners and their managements and express the hope that they will continue to display the qualities that have won them this prestigious national honor. Before concluding, let me reiterate my appeal to all my countrymen. Let us together honor Bharat Mata by launching sincerely and earnestly the National Work Improvement Campaign with the central appeal: work faster, work better, work for the nation. I greet you all and every brother and sister around the world on the 50th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This day, 50 years ago, the member states of the United Nations adopted what President Roosevelt so movingly described as the International Magna Carta of all men everywhere. The immediate backdrop of the declaration was the horrifying spectacle of man's brutality against man as witnessed during the Second World War. During those bleak years of this century, an individual's inalienable right to dignity and liberty were brutally trampled upon. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was supposed to be a safeguard against the repetition of the brutalities of World War II and to establish the overriding supremacy of human rights. This noble purpose was underscored by the Vienna Declaration that asserted all human rights are universal, indivisible, interrelated, and interdependent. This must be noble. However, the existence of human rights, the very characteristic of these rights, was not discovered or forged in 1948. These rights have existed ever since the advent of men and women. They have been in evidence ever since the quest for equality began, a quest that transcended race and religion. Indeed, human rights are intricately linked to the evolution of human society. The sages of ancient India realized the importance of human election to the state assemblies, and every election, even to the local self-governing bodies, brings us face to face with the serious shortcomings in our electoral system. These shortcomings are not confined to the time and process of elections. They have a direct bearing on governance and on the functioning of the elected bodies. If we take the accumulated experience of governance at various levels and of the functioning of our elected bodies in the past few decades, we see how the infirmities in our electoral systems have greatly weakened Indian democracy. The common people are the ultimate sufferers of flawed election and the bad governance that results from them. Such governments lack the capacity to deliver on their promises to the electorate. This is the main reason why the political parties and the entire electoral exercise have less credibility today than before in the eyes of the voters. The resultant apathy and cynicism are not good for our democracy. Indian democracy thus exhibits a worrying paradox. On the one hand, we take legitimate pride in the fact that India is the world's largest democracy and that its preservation is our greatest achievement since independence. It is also true that no time does the vibrancy of Indian democracy become more manifest than during elections. Yet, on the other hand, it is the many weaknesses in our electoral system that have impaired our democracy the most. Removal of this paradox is the greatest task before us. Stop.